really excited to talk about the shut the f- up method. And in a nutshell, for me and like people, is the shut the fuck up method the idea that we all need to stop living in what like Dr. Joe Dispenza calls the familiar past, because it rewires and continuously wires that negativity back into our biology. Is that the gist of what the shut the f- method is?
Yeah, that is part of the gist. And it also dives into the addiction that we have to our emotional states. So, you know, the genesis of the book actually came from working with Dr. Joe. And I just started noticing how, whether it was participants or staff, the complaining wouldn't stop. And I'm like, well, here we have this guy like telling us that we're rewiring and cementing these stressful hormones in our body. And then we turn around, we're like, that's amazing. Like, where's the food? And I'm like, oh my God. And then I started thinking of like, you know, because we're in a culture where everybody's like, oh, you got to speak your mind. You got to don't get up and stand up and stuff. But then also there's a difference between speaking your mind and just going through an addiction of following an emotional addiction and staying in a loop of complaining. You know what I mean? So the shut the up method is not repression, it's mindfulness. It's almost like if you're on a diet or a fast, right? And your friend is like, hey, come pick me up, and I'm at a pizza party, but come inside. You wouldn't go inside the pizza party and be like, why should I repress myself from having pizza? You know what I mean? You commit to your goal, which is your fitness or whatever. So that is the same metaphor to the method. It's like, if your goal is to break patterns and to have transformation in your life, then you have to be mindful about, you have to close your mouth, because you can take all the courses and read all the books, but if you're still complaining, you're still cementing those pathways of the life that you don't want.
I love that. And what I'm really excited about is like, you're my friend and you came up with this yourself. And like, I know a lot of like mindfulness techniques, and like this book actually reminded me like the basics of, have you read The Power of Now?
Yeah.
Okay, so this reminds me a lot of The Power of Now. But what you give are a lot of like really cool like advice on like how to deal with interpersonal relationships or with yourself. So I like it because it's very practical. You know, you did the 10 commandments. What are they called? The 10?
The 10 shut the up commandments.
The 10 shut the up commandments. Yeah. So I like that because it actually gives you some like practical advice. You know, with a lot of the spiritual books, there's not really, they give you like the very deep esoteric foundation. And then there's not a lot of like, hey, when you're going to talk about someone, don't use their name, or, you know, these things like that.
Oh my God, I'm going to take you on my book tours. Like this guy, he knows what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So no, you nailed it.
I really appreciate about the book because it's like very specific advice. And I it was so funny. Last week I had an incident where like I broke your first 2 rules. So when I was reading the book, I was like, oh, that's good advice. And I broke that last week. Oh, God. So I kind of wanted to just kind of go because with those first 2, the first one is, don't use someone's name if you're gonna, you know, vent. And number 2 is vent to one person. And to me, like, I was like, yeah, Jorge, like, I've never heard that advice before. So it's like refreshing to be like, hey, if you have an issue, obviously, like, I'm not a suppressing person, but it gave me some tools, and I think, like, as a man, to vent even properly. And like, I've talked about this before on the podcast, that like, as men, you know, we want to be seen as like reliable and like sturdy, so we don't want to seem unstable and grounded when we vent. We want to, you know, give at least a perception like, hey, we're strong, you can rely on and depend on us. But obviously I teach people to like go to, you know, men's retreats and vent, or have a best friend or father to vent to. And this just gave me even more tools. So let's start with number 1 and 2. Don't use somebody's name and vent to one person.
Yeah, so not using somebody's name. So let's say you and I have Mike, who's our friend in common, right? Yeah. So Miguel, me, and Mike, we're the 3 amigos. Sure. And I'm noticing and I'm experiencing that every time I hang out with Mike, he's cheap, right? Yeah. And I can have that dynamic with Mike, right? But guess what? I'm responsible for how life occurs to you as well, because you're my friend and I want Miguel to have it all, right? So if Mike is cheap with me, like the minute that I tell you, Miguel, dude, Mike's just always so fucking cheap, right? Like, how do I know he has a different dynamic with you? Maybe with you, he's not cheap, right? But the minute that I infect you with that, then you're going to start subconsciously looking for it. And all of a sudden, boom, Mike is cheap. And then you go back to me like, Coño, Jorge, you're right. He's cheap. And then that's what we do so innocently. We go around assassinating people's characters just for the sake of creating a conversation, a bonding, a relatability, connection. And I just want people to start taking responsibility on how we infect our environment and how very innocently could be like, dude, Mike is so cheap. And now all of a sudden we're creating that reputation about people because now you're going to tell somebody else, you're going to tell, and before that you are seeing Mike that way. So it all goes back to quantum physics, how the observer, you know, that they've done these experiments where you see the atom and the electron, the minute the observer looks away, it disappears. Those are all possibilities. So the minute you see and you lock in Mike's particles as like Mike is cheap, boom, he has to occur to you that way. And the more that I go around telling other people, then I'm cementing that that's how he occurs that way as well. So it goes back to personal responsibility. You know, it's like, I don't want to ruin anybody's experience. And if I'm having that experience with him, guess what? I'm gonna actually start committing to being wrong about Mike and be like, you know what? Maybe he did lose his job this week, or maybe, you know, he was raised that way. And the more that I inject empathy and not cement that he's cheap by telling you he's cheap, then all of a sudden I'm opening up the possibility that he starts showing up a different way. So that's the whole reason why we don't use a person's name, unless you want to say that Mike is amazing. Then go around, tell everybody. So it's like, describe people as you want them to see, not as the world would agree if it's something that you don't want.